Hello and welcome to episode 36 of the LiveFitNow podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have had a wonderful week. Once again, I have a lovely conversation lined up with a very wonderful lady called Fiona Thomas. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction about Fiona, she is the author of 2 books, Depression in a Digital Age and Out of Office. She is a freelance content writer, author of Fiona Likes to Blog, and so much more. We discuss many different things today, from writing to creativity and the power that it can have, particularly in the recovery of mental health. I can't wait for you to hear it. So without further ado, here's the conversation. So I would like to start by welcoming you to the Live Fit Now podcast, Fiona. How are you today?
I'm good. Very happy to be here. Excited to chat.
Yeah, me too. So I guess the easiest way to introduce you to my audience is for you to share a little bit about yourself. What is it that you do?
I hate this question. So like every time someone asks me, I'm like, oh God, how do I sum it up? So I'm an author and a freelance writer. I've written 2 books. My first book was a mental health memoir, and my second book, which came out in October, is a no nonsense guide to freelancing. It's called Out of Office, Ditch the 9 to 5 and Be Your Own Boss. So that's my kind of like the work that I'm really proud of, really excited to talk about. And I also run writing courses. So I do some kind of one-off courses, and then I do ones that span, a few months, just helping budding writers basically get their foot in the door, either as writing for fun or writing as a career, because I think both of those things are equally as important. I've written for a few publications like Happiful magazine, Grazia, iPaper, Metro, and just basically make a living writing in any way that I can and try and have fun doing it.
That sounds amazing. And have you always dreamed of being a writer? Was it where you imagined you'd end up?
It was always a dream as a kid and as maybe like a young teenager. But it wasn't like, it's not something that I've pursued from a young age right up until now. I had like a long kind of period in my early 20s where I didn't write at all, and I didn't think that a writing career was in my future. Like I just had kind of shut off that dream and thought that was just unrealistic, that will never happen. But when I was a kid, I loved writing. I'm 34 next month, so we didn't have a computer in the early days. My mum had a typewriter, and I used to love getting to write on her typewriter. And then eventually we got a computer, so I would write little stories and stuff like that. And then when I was in high school, I really loved English, but I didn't really think I didn't think I was good at it, because I think I just thought that English was easy for everyone. Like I didn't really have that perception of like, oh, like this comes naturally to me. I just thought everybody was really good at English. I always thought that was just quite an easy class. But I studied music at university, and quite quickly regretted that choice. But I finished my degree, like enjoyed it, but realised quite quickly that I didn't want a career in music. So after uni, I went into basically working in catering, hospitality. So I managed coffee shops for about a decade. And it was during that time that I had a mental breakdown. And since my mental breakdown, I've kind of like slowly but surely welcomed writing back into my life, like as a hobby. I started a blog and then just got a bit more prolific with my writing, and then eventually got paid to write and started my business. So kind of like a squiggly career path and a kind of on-off passion for writing that was always underlying, but I maybe didn't give it enough attention that that I should have.
No, that's quite a journey, and clearly creativity ran through that with the music degree as well, a way of expressing yourself. But when you first started getting back into the writing, did you do it to write for other people, or did you start by just writing for yourself?
I was just really looking for something to do, because I had gone from working in an incredibly stressful, relatively high-powered job. I was in charge of I was working in like a busy tourist attraction in Scotland. So I managed the catering department, and at one point I was managing like 2 cafes, a gift shop, a cinema snack bar, like 20 plus members of staff, like really big budgets. So I went from that to all of a sudden being unemployed, being at home all day, and I just felt totally lost. Like I felt like my identity had totally been stripped away, because I was like, who am I if I don't have a job to go to? And wasn't using my brain for anything at all, which was good because my brain really needed to rest. That was why I was off. But after a few months, I was like, I really was just getting the urge to do something, and I wasn't sure what. And I think I found like a website that were looking for contributors, and I thought, oh, that sounds like fun, like I could just like write some blog posts. And it started with kind of the health and wellness section, because that was the stuff that I was really into. So to answer your question, I wrote for an audience in the beginning, and then after a few months of doing that, the person that ran the website said, you should really start your own blog, because then we can link, like you can link all the articles that you write back to your own blog, so it's like a good bit of PR for you. So I don't know if I would have started a blog off my own back unless someone had kind of nudged me to do it. Like I feel like all the things I've done in my life have all been like somebody kind of nudging me. Like I'm quite bad for waiting for someone to give me permission to do it. So yeah, then I started the blog, and that really was just for me, just I started writing about health and fitness. So I would write about my workouts, and I've deleted a lot of them now, because a lot of the like healthy eating posts were like things you'd be like, oh my god, that's really bad, that's really restrictive, like lots of like paleo eating habits and all that kind of stuff. So it was really just a kind of an online diary of what I'd been up to. And then after doing that for about a year or so, I realised I wasn't that interested in that stuff anymore. And that's when I started writing about my mental health journey, and basically just kind of threw caution to the wind and was really vulnerable in all the stuff that I wrote, and really honest in the stuff that I wrote. And I didn't have a big audience, so it wasn't like, it didn't feel scary to me, because in my mind nobody was reading it. I mean, I could see the figures, I could see there was like 10 people a day coming onto my website, so it was fine. And I found that quite freeing, because I was like, oh, I can just write this, publish it, and it's kind of, then it's out of my head, and it just made me feel lighter. And then over time people did start to read it and started to comment and started to email me and stuff like that, and that was like a whole new version, I guess, of validation for writing all that stuff.
Yeah, and do you think the writing in itself helped you work through those times? Do you think you would have struggled to get to where you are today without that?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the very early days, I'd say for the first maybe like 2 years or so after I was diagnosed, I found it very hard to talk about my mental illness vocally. So I'd speak to my doctor just, briefly, like once every 2 weeks or whatever, to get my medication. I didn't talk about it really to my friends and family. Like they would ask who I was, and I would just say like I'm fine, but never go into any detail. And I didn't have the language to explain how I was feeling vocally, and I wasn't confident enough to say it vocally. So for me, writing, I didn't realise how helpful it would be until I started. And then it just gave me the permission to, I guess, like do a bit of word vomit like onto the page, but then in going back and editing it and refining it and making it into some sort of coherent blog post, I guess that was my way of kind of like taking control of the situation and finding meaning from what had happened. So, connecting dots between like stuff that I hadn't yet realized, like, oh, like maybe I feel like this because I did, I've been working like this for the last few years, or maybe I made these choices because of what happened to me, or like what I was like as a teenager, like making all these kind of connections between what's happened and what is happening, almost like not rewriting my story, but just telling my story through a certain lens, I found really helpful. And it's interesting because I think if I was to go and write about those experiences now, it would probably be framed in a completely different way as well, because you write about your story at different stages in your life. So but definitely in the early days it was really, really helpful for me to just organize my thoughts, and kind of, I guess, like compartmentalize my kind of experiences in a way that was helpful. Yeah.
Is it one of those sorts of things you would recommend if people are struggling with their mental health, to start writing, wherever it might be, whether it be, I know some people use online platforms or a journal or some sort of diary, just to have also something to potentially take to your doctor or take to see someone if you're going to talk to someone about it?
Yeah, that's such a good point, because when I went to the doctor for help when I was in crisis, I did write everything down, because I know myself, and I know that I get flustered with my words, especially if I'm feeling anxious or nervous. And I knew that I would go in and that I would talk myself down, and I would say, like, try not to exaggerate, and I would forget to say something. So I wrote everything down, wrote all my symptoms down on like a scrap of paper, so that when I went in, I could just show the doctor the piece of paper, and that was really helpful. And I think for people, especially right now in this situation that we're in, where everybody feels like so many people have got it worse than me. I don't have the right to feel anxious. I don't have the right to feel sad. If you're fit and healthy and you've got a job and all this kind of thing, but you're still struggling to just process what's going on right now, I think it can be really helpful to write things down, because it's not often until you write down all your symptoms that you realize that they stack up. And that's the thing with burnout and mental illness, is that you don't necessarily need one big traumatic event to give you mental health concerns. It can be a very slow build up, and it can just be like the straw that breaks the camel's back. And when you write all that down and look back, then you can say, oh, actually, like, it is valid that I'm not coping right now, when you see it all written down in black and white.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think, so were there telltale signs for you that perhaps you decided to ignore or kind of recognize but just carried on anyway, that perhaps if you were to share them now may help other people to think, oh, maybe I am having, or I'm heading towards the direction of having problems? Do you think there are things that, obviously you can only speak for your own personal experience, but I think it's so useful to hear someone's real life experience?
Yeah, everybody's different. And in my book Out of Office, I wrote a section about burnout, and I wrote down all the symptoms in there. And I've had quite a few people email me and say, oh, it was really good to read all those symptoms, because a lot of the symptoms of burnout are just symptoms of like being a human day to day, like tiredness, lethargy, and like you know not really enjoying things that you used to enjoy, or having struggling to sleep or struggling to concentrate. It's all these things that you just think, oh, I'm lazy, or I'm a rubbish human because I can't do these things. But when you see them all written down, actually it can become quite clear that just 2 or 3 of them consistently over time can be really detrimental. So I would say one of the big things is, not having enjoyment of things that you normally do. I think that can be quite a big red flag that people don't really take notice of. Trouble sleeping as well, so like sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. For me, it was a lot. It would be like waking up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, like waking up at the same time every night. That's like a big red flag of stress, I would say, that you wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and you do that repeatedly every night. I'm trying to think what else. I was definitely relying a lot on alcohol, like alcohol to help me sleep, alcohol to help me blow off steam at the weekends. Obviously, alcohol's fine in moderation, but I think we all know ourselves when we're using it as a bit of a crutch, and that's definitely something that I've done a lot over the years. So yeah, there's lots of red flags that I look back now and it's easy to see with hindsight, but when you're in it, it's really hard to see that they all stack up.
Yeah.
And like you say, writing all that stuff down can actually be a really good way to kind of gently evaluate, what's going on.
Yeah, allow yourself to start to notice things. Yeah. And So how did you get from deciding from writing the blog into publishing your first book?
Well, so it's it's not a funny story, but everybody always asks me for my tips on getting published, and I feel like so unqualified to tell people what to do, because I feel like every author has their own kind of unique journey to publication. Mine started in 2016 when I applied for a job at Trigger Publishing. So I had just moved to Birmingham at the time, and I was working part-time in a cafe, and I just happened to see that Trigger, this brand new mental health publisher, were looking for a copy editor. Now, I have no business being a copy editor. No business. But I was so desperate to get out of working in catering that I thought maybe I could give it a go, because it's a mental health publisher and because I have this background of having written about mental health for so long. And at this point I had written for some charities. So I'd written for Mind, I'd written for Heads Together. So I felt like I had a little bit of clout that I could kind of like blag my way in for an interview, which I did. So I managed to get an interview, but I didn't get the job because there was a written test, which I'm like certain that I failed, which is fine. But I went in, I met everyone was really nice and all that kind of thing. But I didn't get it, and that was that. And then I just followed them on social media and kept up to date with what they were doing. Didn't in a million years think, oh, I'll pitch them a book. It just didn't even really cross my mind. And then I went on holiday one year, about a year after that, I think, and I read Control Alt Delete by Emma Gannon, which is a memoir about growing up online. And I also read Mad Girl by Bryony Gordon, which is a mental health memoir about OCD. And I read them both in the space of a week, and I felt like I had a story that, if there's a Venn diagram with both those books, I felt like mine sat in the middle, which would be half mental health, half about growing up with the internet and how the internet impacts mental health and specifically mental health recovery, because I feel like social media and blogging and online communities has been really, really helpful for my mental health at a time when I felt really socially isolated. Like, it's interesting to talk about it now because I feel like everyone's using Zoom and WhatsApp and house party and all this stuff right now, whereas I felt like I really reached out and used that in about 2015-16, and used it to meet people online who really understood what it was like to have a mental illness. So that was the idea for the book, and I wrote down the title, Depression in a Digital Age, just kind of wrote it on a napkin or something, stuffed it in my pocket whilst I was like lying by the pool in Mallorca with my mum. And then I think it was about 2 months later, Trigger put out a tweet saying that they were accepting submissions for manuscripts. And I thought, well, I've got an idea actually for the first time ever. So maybe I'll give it a go. So they had a open night where people could go along and meet the team and get tips on how to submit a manuscript. So I went along, and because I'd already met the people there, I felt like I was in a really good position to reintroduce myself. And again, for the first time in my life, I had a pitch. I had an elevator pitch for my book, and I basically pitched it there and then. And then I submitted my book proposal, which is for non-fiction books. You just kind of put together like a structure, proposed structure, and like who would buy the book and all that kind of stuff. And the following February, I think it was, I signed the deal with them. So it was like a combination of, like, I think having the space to come up with an idea that I was happy with, and also having that kind of naivety back in the day of like going for an interview at a place where I knew I wouldn't really get the job, but I just felt drawn to the company in general. And I think it's just like a example of like, you don't know what will happen, but why not just give it a go and see, and be nice to people along the way, because you never know. You really never know when you're going to like cross paths with someone again.
I guess the moral of that story is to take any opportunity that's presented with you, and you'll get something from it, whether it be a connection or confidence or
if it feels right, just go for it. Yeah. So it's been great, and Trigger published my second book as well, which is good to work with the same team again. And they've kind of branched out from mental health into like the wellness space and self-help. So Out of Office is designed for freelancers, and it is a practical guide on setting up a business, but it's also got quite a few chapters on the mental health aspect, which is something that I was really keen to put in there. So there's tips on like how to take time off and how to get confident with things like raising your rates and pitching to people and stuff like that. So yeah, I felt like it followed on quite nicely from the first book, because the first book was me kind of like overcoming mental illness and realizing that I love to write, and then the second book is me like, now I've made it into a living.
That's really quite a journey, and it's also great to hear that it sounds like the publisher's going on a journey as well, so it's going really nicely. And do you have a vision for the future as to where you want to take it next, or are you waiting for the next idea?
So after I'd written the first book, I sent in the proposal for Out of Office the day after publication day, because I thought it would make me look crazy if I sent it on publication day. So I like waited till the next day. I was like, here's my next idea. So at the moment I did take a bit of a break. So the book came out the book came out in October. But I finished the manuscript back in January. So I feel like I have had this big gaping hole in my life where I've not been working on a book. So I got an agent this year, a literary agent for the first time ever, which is really cool. So she is working with me on a proposal for another book, but there's nothing that I can really talk about yet, because we're still in the very early stages. But yeah, I'm definitely working on something new, because I'm just a self-confessed bit of a workaholic. So I just like to have, I think that's the thing about being a freelancer that I love, is that there's always something new to work on, and things chop and change so much. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
Do you enjoy different writing styles? Like I'm guessing it's slightly different if you're writing an article or a blog post to writing a book. Do you enjoy the different challenges of the different styles of writing?
Yeah, I love having a brief. Like I love working to a word count or knowing that I'm writing for a certain publication, because it just gives you a bit of direction. Like I think as a writer, like a lot of us fear the blank page, and a lot of us, you can't just pluck an idea out of thin air and just run with it. Or I can't. Like I like to have deadlines and, like I say, a brief and some sort of direction. So yeah, when I'm writing articles, I like to know, okay, I'm pitching it to this magazine. I know what their audience like. I know what they've written before. Like I know what kind of tone of voice that I should be writing it in. And then, but what I've kind of rediscovered recently is I love writing for my own blog and for my own newsletter, because then I do have control over it, and I can write in a different way. So I can write in a way that's a lot more creative, a lot more expressive, a lot more colloquial. It's just like a conversation between me and a friend. And I feel like on my blog I can write all the things that I'd like to pitch to magazines, but they probably wouldn't publish. So I write all of that kind of personal stuff on my blog, which I'm really fallen in love with again. And then yeah, writing for a book again is like completely different, because in my mind, that you kind of want your book to stand the test of time. Like you'd want someone to be able to pick it up in like a few years from now and still get something from it. Whereas when you write for online, you're commenting on stuff like as you see it right now, and it might not be read again for a while. So yeah, there's definitely lots of different like pros and cons for each kind of thing. And this year I've really tried to like make sure that I dedicate at least some time every week for writing for me, on either like a journal kind of thing, or writing something kind of experimental just as a way to improve my writing. So I've been working on short stories, like poems, all that kind of stuff that feels like really scary to me as a non-fiction writer.
That's my next question. My next question: do you ever use fiction as a way of an outlet as well?
I have, yeah, basically started doing that this year and found it really really freeing, because writing from non-fiction, you can write your opinion, but a lot of the time you do need to back it up, or at least give some sort of proof, or include quotes from people that you've spoken to, so it can all be challenged, it can all be questioned, which is good. Like, that's like just good conversation starters. But yeah, writing, like I wrote I've been working on a short story, and that's been great to it just kind of lets you relax, I guess, and just say, well, this isn't for anyone other than me, so I can just let go and see where it goes, and let it kind of meander and let it develop over time. And yeah, you can express things in a way that you probably wouldn't be able to express in nonfiction. And a lot of the time you can, if you want to make a point about something, you can demonstrate it in fiction in a way that you probably, or maybe could in an article or in a book.
Yeah, you can go anywhere. You've got that complete creative freedom.
And you can use those characters to like say things that you would never say, but you really want to say.
And do you work with people that are writing fiction and non-fiction, or is it mostly?
So it's a mixture. So the courses that I run online, I've got one called Find Your Voice, which is, at the moment, it's for freelancers and business owners who want to write better copy, basically, for their websites, for their social media, for their blogs, just in a way that I just want people to have fun with that, and remember that not everything has to be like an icky sales page. You can just write stuff in the way that feels good to you. So that's all non-fiction. And then I do a pitching for freelancers course, which is again non-fiction, because that's teaching people how to pitch to like websites and magazines and other publications to write articles. But my most recent course, Inspire, Write, Repeat, is open to everybody to do anything. So I've really just created a space that facilitates creativity. I'm not there to critique anyone's work or tell anyone to go in a certain direction. I just provide people with, every week I give them journal prompts or a creative writing prompt, and they can pick from whatever they want to do. So we've got people in there we've got 2 people that write poems, somebody that's writing a novel, somebody that's working on their blog, a few other people that are just using it for writing social media content, some people are just journaling. So there's like a big mixture there, and I think that's the first course that I've done that's really welcomed everyone in. But because I'm not a professional fiction writer, obviously I didn't want to create something that's like, I'm going to show you how to write a book, because I can't do that. I can't show you how to write a novel. But I think it's important to just create spaces for people where we can all be creative together, and also take the pressure off of, like, you're not submitting homework, so it's not about the end result. It is actually about the process, and just all of us showing up together and holding each other accountable to just show up. It doesn't matter what you create that day, just show up and commit to the process.
It's almost allowing yourself to be creative, and just giving yourself the time to do it as well, because it's so easy to get distracted by everything. And just having that connected energy must be so powerful, because you're all on the same page, even though you're writing very different pages. But it allows that energy to flow, which must make it a more powerful feeling than just by yourself.
Yeah, it's really good, because we meet on Zoom every Wednesday morning, between 7 and 9 in the morning. So no one's got a camera on, because it's early in the morning. So I was like, nobody put a camera on. Everybody's on mute, and we just say hello in the chat and we start writing. But the energy in the chat is like so infectious, which I didn't anticipate. I thought we'll come on for 2 hours, and if nobody talks in the chat, that's fine. But actually, everybody's really good at kind of inspiring each other and giving each other pep talks, and stuff like that. So yeah, it's great. It's the thing that I try and tell people about writing, is that no matter how much you dread it, the thing that gives you momentum is just like the energy from the last time you wrote. So you kind of have to just show up and write, and remember how good that feels, and that will spur you on, like, to do the next bit of writing. But it's really hard to take that first step.
Do you recommend people, and particularly, I'm sure there's a lot of people that since leaving school have avoided writing as much as possible, and they may not even consider themselves as people that would be writers, to just have a go, try and express yourself in a different way, because I guess it's very easy for us to get stuck in our lanes of how we express ourselves, whether it be through social media or through our voice. It's a completely different way of expressing yourself. So I guess it's worth us all trying, even if we might consider ourselves not very good at it. If you don't practice, you can't get good.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be like, if you wanted to start a journaling practice, it doesn't need to be pages and pages of like, here's what I did from morning to night. Like, that journaling is completely customizable, and I think that is a good way to start. And you can do simple things like, just, you know, it can just be a list. Like, you get up in the morning, you say, here's the 3 things I need to do today, and then before you go to bed, you can write, you know, here's the 3 things I'm grateful for today. It can be something as simple as that. And I was watching a video today about somebody talking about keeping a journal like for your whole life, and she made such a good point that she says like that you can write down the things that seem unimportant. So today I could write down that we recorded a podcast and we spoke about creativity, and I could talk about what the weather was like and what tea I was drinking and all that kind of thing. And it seems unimportant now, but to look back on that in a year from now or 5 years from now would be so interesting, even though it doesn't feel interesting now.
Yeah, no, it's very powerful, isn't it? And actually, I was listening to a podcast this morning, and it was making me think very much along those lines. It's like, if you were to ask someone, what were you drinking at 5:30 last week, last Wednesday, well, no one would be able to answer that. But they're part of our journey, and in the moment it feels significant, but it unravels. And sometimes looking back, it's a tiny thing, and other times it's a really big thing. But it's quite a wonderful snapshot, really, of how we were thinking at the time as well. Because I think sometimes how you express yourself, and you go back and read something, you're like, oh, that's interesting, because you probably wouldn't necessarily write something in the same way 2 years later or a decade later. That's a very powerful way of being able to see how you were at a different time.
Yeah, and if you are looking for inspiration for creativity, like, looking at your past self is brilliant, because you can kind of look at it with perspective and say like, oh, like, she didn't know what she was doing. Hilarious. Or, you can pick up on like a funny incident that you'd probably forgotten about and all that kind of stuff. It's like, it's quite good, I think, for mining for ideas for creative projects.
And if people are lacking in confidence, I think there's probably quite a lot of people that have the narrative that they're not creative. I'm guessing you'd say that isn't necessarily true. I think we've all got a creative spark, and it's a way of opening that doorway, perhaps.
Yeah, I think everybody is creative in some way, even if they don't realize it. It's just finding what works for you. Obviously, I'm a big fan of writing, and I'm doing a workshop in January, which I've just announced. It's called Creative Confidence for Writers. And I'm sure people will be expecting like the big secret to creative confidence for writers, but the actual secret for me is actually to sit down and write. So it's going to be a hands-on workshop where we sit down and we answer journal prompts. So we're going to be thinking about why we don't feel confident, and reflecting on what, how was creativity framed when you were a kid or as a teenager? What made you fall out of love with writing? Like, all these kind of things. And I think kind of gently exploring those issues through writing, I think, is a really good way to figure out like why you don't feel creative, or why you feel creative but you never feel like you have permission to take the step to actually be creative. So maybe that's us going round in a circle, but I feel like to be to be a confident writer, you kind of have to just start by being an unconfident writer. And once you write through those kind of mental blocks, like in journaling, that's what I do with Inspire, Write, Repeat people. The first week we answered journal prompts, and everybody was having revelations of like, I didn't realize that I thought like this. I didn't realize I was holding myself back. And now that I've written, I've got this, like you say, I've got this like electric energy now that I've done it, and that's what's going to push me forward. So I think it's that thing of just doing the thing, like taking those tiny steps to do a little bit of writing gives you the confidence to keep going. And the more you do it, it's a practice. It's like meditation. Like you can sit down and have a terrible session, but you still meditated, and it's a practice, and it's never going to be perfect. It's just continually showing up and trying to do it every single time.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Like it genuinely is like the true secret of life. It's to do, isn't it? It really is to do. Like, so how do I become a writer? Well, start writing. You've become a writer. It's almost, I think we actually put a lot of barriers in place as well. And I think there's something that so often comes up in conversation with people as well, is that everyone starts as a beginner. I think people forget that you're not just going to, and this can apply to most things that we would do, you're not just going to wake up one day and be able to do it like the best person, because they've probably practiced for years. But if you make a start, you can then start on that road, that journey to becoming good. But don't not start because you're not good yet.
Yeah.
No one is when they start.
I was watching a webinar last night with Seth Godin. Do you know Seth Godin? He's like an American author. He's written like 19 best-selling books or something, and he writes all about marketing and like creativity and like big idea books that are going to like change the world basically. And he was talking about his new book called The Practice, and that's all about how he basically doesn't think that anybody is born like with miraculous gifts. He said that J.K. Rowling wasn't born talented. She's not talented. He's like, nobody's talented. Everybody's just basically works to build a skill. He said, if you found J.K. Rowling's notebooks from when she first started writing, I can guarantee you they would be terrible. And I found that quite funny and quite reassuring, that it's like, yeah, like you only see people when they're successful and you think they just woke up and wrote a book and published it, and that was like the first thing they wrote, when you don't see the behind the scenes of them, you know, waking up early and putting in extra effort and all the stuff that doesn't see the light of day. Which is fine. I think what I'm finding is, in myself as well as other writers, is that we don't write because we fear judgment, but actually, so if you say, well, we fear judgment, so we'll write and then we'll not show anyone what we write, people still don't do it, and it's because they're fearful of the judgment that they will give themselves. So we're actually just fearful of our own self-judgment. And I think that's, once I realised that, I was like, well, that's stupid. That's really stupid. Because at the end of the day, if I write it and I don't like it, I can make it better, or I can delete it and I can start again. So there's no humiliation there. I'm not going to be publicly humiliated because it's only me that's going to see it.
Such a good point, particularly with the perfectionist mindset, which I think creative people so often can be closer to than any other personality attribute. And it's funny that we prevent ourselves doing things and are harsh to ourselves that we would never say to other people. And it's trying to, I guess, control that narrative to ourselves and allow ourselves just to do it, even if we don't use it.
Yeah, and writing can be good for that, because you can write a letter to yourself, you can talk to yourself as though you're someone else. Yeah, that's a really good way to kind of like change, I guess, like the neural pathways and like think about things in a new way.
Yeah, make it physical. And a question I was thinking of just a moment ago is, do you write with pen and paper or do you write using computer?
Such a good question. So I write with like on computer for like 90% of what I do. So like obviously I would never like write a book longhand. Like it just wouldn't work. So yeah, most things I write on the computer, but I do write on pen and paper when I'm trying to just connect with how I feel. So if it's journaling, or I've started doing a bit of scripting, which is where you like write about goals that you want to achieve, but you write them from a place of having already achieved them. So if I wanted to like move to Antarctica, I would say, I live in Antarctica, it's beautiful here. I got here because I saved up for 6 months and I made a plan, and it's great here because the weather's brilliant, I'm all alone, like, do you know what I mean, like all that kind of thing. So you kind of set the scene. So I do that on pen and paper. I don't want to move to Antarctica, by the way. And yeah, if I want to just kind of untangle thoughts, I find pen and paper is really good, because with when you write on, it's funny because when I write in a Word document, it's much easier to delete things and rearrange things and edit, right? Isn't it? Because you can just delete and move stuff around. But it also there's like a big sense of expectation, I think, when you write on a Word document, because you're like, oh, this has got to be good. And you kind of already self-edit before you even start writing. Whereas with pen and paper, once it's down, it's down. You're not going to like score stuff out really or get the Tipp-Ex out. You just write it down and then rewrite it later or type it up later. So I think writing with pen and paper is a really good way to kind of figure out how you really feel about something, and how to get a kind of authentic narrative out of yourself and get the truth out of yourself. And I find writing with pen and paper is quite good if I want to just like I say, just connect with what's really going on. I find that pen and paper is better. And because there's that physical nature, like it just feels different. And I like having the separation between, you know, writing for work and writing for me, because it just has a different feel and a different, it comes from a different place, I think.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense to me. I'd just like to go back to something you brought up towards the beginning, actually, and that is, what tools do you use now to look after your own health and well-being? You mentioned fitness, meditation. Is that all part of your daily routine or your weekly routine to help you create as well?
Yeah, I wish I could meditate every day. Well, I say that I could do it if I wanted to. I don't meditate very much, but I meditate probably when I'm feeling really bad. Like that's one of the tools that I will go to if I'm feeling really anxious, and I know that's going to help kind of bring me down a notch or two. But I love exercise. I love moving every day in a way that feels good. Like if you read my first book, I had like quite an unhealthy obsession with relationship with fitness. I used to do a lot of fitness classes, and I did fitness classes like every single day, multiple classes a day, and it was like a self-care practice that very quickly became an unhealthy coping mechanism, and yeah, it just became a bit much. So since then, now I try and reframe exercise as like, it's never a punishment, it's something to do, something that feels good, to be a bit more intuitive about what I actually want to do and listening to my body. So today I did yoga. I do virtual workouts with an instructor that I know from Scotland. She does virtual workouts. So sometimes we do yoga, sometimes we do HIIT, sometimes do legs, bums and tums. I love a like old school aerobics class.
Can't beat them.
Yeah. And I love walking. I try and do lots of walking on my own or with my headphones in. I just really love getting fresh air and getting daylight and all that kind of stuff. So I think my self-care toolkit is like pretty basic, and I think that's the way, I think that's what all good self-care toolkits are. They just kind of cater for your basic human needs, for like, I need to hydrate, I need to sleep, I need to eat at least once a day, I need to talk to humans at least once a day, all that kind of stuff. I think quite often we overcomplicate self-care and think about, you know, booking one big yoga retreat that's going to like solve all your problems, when actually it's like little acts of kindness, isn't it, every day?
Tiny things that are just, I should say, normal human things, but it's so easy to overlook them. You just got to give yourself a little bit of time to do them, because I think sometimes, and I feel with a lot of conversations I've had this year, it's like it's been really heightened because, you know, the energy of the whole world has been so off kilter, and people have been thrust out of their normal lives and into these very restricted lives, which, let's be honest, none of us are particularly used to because we've lived during a very peaceful time. And people have come to realize, I mean, I can't believe how many more people I see out walking now, like going and exploring the countryside and trying to find new places to go. Whereas, you know, I never remember seeing these people going out. People are understanding how much it can give us and how much better we can feel from it. Just simply, like you say, just going for a walk, and just taking a little bit of time out of your own bubble. But that's going to continue to apply going forward as normality resumes, because it really is the very simple things. But it certainly isn't sexy to try and sell it as a package. So they do try and make it like there's all these fancy things you have to do, but actually you just need to come to realize what makes you feel good as well, and what you need right now. Like sometimes you just need to get out, don't you? And other times perhaps a bath is better, or writing, or, you know, there's so many options, but they are really, really basic, really simple, and we just have to find what works for us.
And it changes day to day, which is something that can be quite hard to come to terms with if you've done something for years and then all of a sudden one day that doesn't work anymore, or it feels different, or you don't want to do that anymore. Because in the first lockdown I did exercise at the same time every day, Monday to Friday, for about, must have been about 3 months, religiously. Muscle memory got me up out of bed. I just woke up and I was on the mat every single day. And now I really, really struggle. I have to do it at different times of day. I do it a lot less. I substitute it for walking a lot. And I think that, like, forgiving yourself for that is like an act of self-care in itself, because it's just realizing that we change, like, and that, you know, as the seasons change, it depends how we're feeling and what our needs are and what's happening at work and what's happening with family. Like, all that stuff changes, and having a varied self-care toolkit, I think, is really important, so that when something doesn't work, you don't go into like a huge panic and not know what to do. You've got something else that you can pick up instead.
Yeah, I think flexibility is so important. Like, I think there's a lot of rigidity out there, and I think as much as it can work really well for some people, I think it allows them to really fit it into their life. The problem is when you can't stick with it, and then you kind of break, and then the system usually just completely disappears. Whereas if you get that, or allow yourself to be flexible, as you say, the seasons make a huge difference. I think everyone's energy levels, you know, after a year of this is really dipping. The seasons change. Like, there's so many factors that's making our approach just need to be different. And as soon as you allow that flexibility, it allows you to keep consistent. And consistency, I think, with any of these practices is so important, rather than having that rigid system that just breaks.
Agree.
Just allowing for that pliability, I think, is just so much better. I also wanted to ask, with your own journey to where you are today, have you found that you're writing your blog, you've created a community for yourself that has allowed you to get the support from other people that you need, and get something from giving support to others?
Yeah, definitely. I've met a lot of really good friends on Instagram that are now, you know, they've got my number, and we Zoom, and we're pals, and we meet up when we're allowed to meet up outside of the app. And yeah, I've had, like, don't want to jinx it, but I had so few negative experiences on Instagram, and so many positive ones. I feel like when you compared to Twitter, like, Instagram's just so supportive. Like, all the people are just so kind and engaged, and like genuinely have an interest in what you're doing. So Instagram is definitely where my community is, and that all started with the blog, yeah, and basically just being quite vulnerable on there. And my thing is, I just always want my content and what I show up, how I show up online, I just always want to be relatable, because I'm not always showing people how to do things the right way, or how to solve all their problems. Like, a lot of the time I'm just showing people that I make mistakes, and that I've got mental health problems, and I'm not perfect, and nobody needs to be. So I'm a big fan of, like, showing up without makeup, and showing people all the mistakes that I've made. And I've just launched my newsletter, a new newsletter, and it's called The Typo, because I make make so many typos for a writer. It's like really quite, I don't say embarrassing, it's just funny. Like, all my stories, my captions have always got typos. Like, I've had CVs that I've had typos, like, and I just think it's like, it's funny, and it's not the end of the world if you make a typo.
I think it's great, actually, because, that's really empowering, because I imagine that's one of the sort of narratives that people tell themselves, like, oh, I'm not very good at spelling or whatever else, or I'm not good at coaching. It doesn't really matter, does it? Because that hasn't taken away from what you're sharing with people and that people are relating to and loving the post regardless of the typo. And if that is the thing that's stopping you, I think seeing someone else's vulnerability and the fact that you don't actually care there's a typo, so why would anyone else care if you made a typo? It's like a really empowering way of, again, making people perhaps stop questioning themselves and just going for it.
Yeah, because I realised I was making loads of typos, and I felt embarrassed. This has like been happening for years. I felt really embarrassed, and then I felt like I'm really going to have to be more stringent with stuff and double check it before I send it out. And then I thought, that's an awful lot of work. And I know I'm going to keep making typos, so why don't I just, like, I use humour in everything, so I was like, why don't I just laugh at it? And then that thing of, like, if you laugh at yourself first, nobody else can laugh at you. So now, like, nobody can pull me up for having a typo because I've already drawn attention to it. So and I just think that's, like, having a bit of humour in your mistakes, I think it just always makes life a bit easier and makes it easier for other people to deal with their own mistakes.
Yeah, it's fun. I like it. This is a big one, and you can answer it from a personal or professional aspect. It's completely your choice, but what inspires you?
Good question. I think people, people and what they've been through, and how, like, I'm really, really interested in true crime podcasts and true crime documentaries. I think I'm always really interested in, like, why people do certain things, and what causes, like, two people who've had, like, a similar upbringing, for one to go on and be a criminal and for one to go on and be, like, volunteering and working for a charity. Like, what is the thing that makes people do this? And then also people who have lived through, like, mental illness or lived through trauma, like, how does that affect people, and why do some people use it as a force for good, and why does it weigh other people down? I think how people are and their character and how they react to situations, I find really, really interesting. I think if I'd been smarter, I could have been a psychologist.
Such a fascinating area, isn't it? I do love that. It's I think people really truly can inspire us in so many different ways. Like, there's so many layers and ways in which people can inspire us, whether it be through the physical thing that we do, how we approach things. They can give us a whole different take on something as well, that can open our eyes to a different way of doing things, and that is such a special thing.
Yeah, and I'm an introvert, so introverts are, like, famous for not having no kind of brain space for small talk. So when I meet someone new, like, I always find myself talking to them about something really, like, deep and meaningful. Like, we always end up talking about, like, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you, or how do you feel about religion? Like, all these, like, really deep topics that to me is, like, way more interesting than, like, what you had for dinner last night. So I feel like I love having those kind of conversations with people, and that's the stuff that I find really, really inspiring.
Yeah, deep connection, not superficial connection.
Yeah.
You're not a weather chat person.
Nope.
I love it. And also, actually, to help guide my audience, if they are thinking about your books, what is the difference between each of your books to think which one may be more suitable for them?
So Depression in the Digital Age is is a memoir, so it's my experience. It's just a story of one person and how they have coped with living up in a world where there was no internet and then there was internet, and then living through a mental breakdown and kind of coming out the other end. So if you're struggling with your mental health, you've had anxiety, depression, and you are looking for a way out, then Depression in a Digital Age is a story that might give you some light at the end of the tunnel. It's not a practical book, so there's not tips or advice in it. It's just very much my story. And Out of Office is for anyone who's thinking about going freelance or is already freelance and is looking for tips on how to have a happier, more organised, more self-forgiving, I think, existence as a freelancer. So it's for anyone who's, even if you're just thinking about starting a side hustle or you've got an idea for going freelance, it's designed to be very accessible, very funny, like kind of like a little pep talk, just to kind of give you the confidence to get started.
Has going freelance made you feel more free? Has it given you more freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. It's given me, when I was researching the book, the thing that I found through studies that people have done and through just speaking to people who've gone freelance is that a lot of freelancers, we didn't actually dream of setting up a business. We didn't think, oh, I'd love to not know how much money I'm going to earn every month, like all the scary stuff that comes with it. Actually, what we all want from our careers and from our lives is autonomy, and we want choice and we want flexibility to work in a way that suits us. So whether that's working from 12 o'clock until 8 o'clock, or getting up really early and finishing work at midday and going to the gym, like, or being able to pick up the kids from school and then pick up your emails in the evening. Like, we all just want that flexibility and some sort of fulfillment from work. So it's definitely given me a sense of freedom, in a logistical fashion of day to day. Like, I can work wherever I want, I can set my own hours, but also a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment, and that the work that I do genuinely excites me and also helps other people. So yeah, it's been brilliant. It's not the easiest job in the world. It still has a lot of stresses, but it's the stresses that I'd much rather deal with than working in a corporate environment.
Yeah, it sounds great. And I'd just like to start drawing to a close, and I'd love to give you the floor to share one thing that you think everyone would benefit from knowing. I do throw these big questions. They're always like, oh.
The thing I like a piece of advice I like to give people is that don't be too hard on yourself, because you trying your best, like I feel like most of us, we're all just trying our best. But your best today might look a lot different to how it did last week, and it will change again in a week from now. So if your best today is, getting up and working for an hour and then going back to bed, then that's still you trying your best. Even if this time last week you were up at 5 a.m. and you did a workout and you had a green smoothie and then you ran 6 miles and then you got in a full work day, that was you trying your best as well. So just remember that your best changes, and don't be too hard on yourself.
That's lovely. I really love that. Thank you. So where can my audience find you? I will pop all the links on the show notes as well.
So my website is Fiona Likes to Blog. You can find out all the stuff you need to know there about my books, about my courses, about the typo. I've also got a podcast which is called Out of Office. So that's got lots of specific tips for freelancers. And you can find me on Instagram at Fiona Likes to Blog. And my books are available on Amazon, on bookshop.org, all good bookshops as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. I've loved this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 36 of the LiveFitNow podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Fiona as much as I did having it. There are so many wonderful snippets of information within that conversation and lots of places you can head to get some more information. We would both love to hear from you, so please do not hesitate to get in touch. Click through on the show notes or you can email me directly, hello@livefitnow.co.uk. As always, I would be so grateful if you could share with your family, friends, colleagues. Perhaps you can link them through to a specific episode that you think they might like to hear. You can send them over to the YouTube channel, or perhaps just tag them in a post. I would also really appreciate it if you were able to leave a review or just share the general podcast on your social media platform. Thank you for listening to this episode. Let me know if you have anything you'd like covering in the future. Until next Thursday.